What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 3 of the Selah Leaders podcast. So excited for this journey that we're going on with you. We started off in episode 1 a little more uptight.
Yeah.
Kind of made it a little more casual for episode 2, and we're not going to keep decreasing, right? No one's showing up here in tank tops. But
Yeah, we're not going to go quite that far,
But but I think last episode was a good kind of middle ground.
Yeah.
For kind of what we're looking to do. I've got my podcast guide here, Darren.
What's up, everybody? I'm not going to be the hello, I'm Darren, like last episode, but what's up, everybody? It's good to be back. We talked about our shoes last time, and we're both wearing different shoes today. What do you got on today?
I have an olive suede pair of Air Maxes scooped up from the eBays, and man, they're great. Air Max all around shoe. But what was cool about these is I actually got them for free. So I reached out. So I bought this pair of shoes, had negotiated back and forth with the seller. They got shipped, then they got lost, and it was about a month later, I reached out and eBay gave me a refund, and then randomly one day they showed up. And so I reached back out to eBay and said, hey, these shoes actually arrived. And they said, oh, it's too late. We've already closed the case. Just keep them. They're yours. And I was like, favor ain't fair, Like that's the Lord. Yeah, right there. So we're able to get a free pair of Air Maxes. What you got on?
Nice. Yeah, who doesn't love a pair of free shoes? No, so today I got on. Try to get these in the picture.
I need your leg a little higher.
A little higher.
No,
no, I got on a pair of Dunks today. Which these, man, I told you for a while, like I'm looking for flashier colors. I want something brighter. And so I found these and I love it. It relates a little bit to what I do in the business world. So the colors anyway. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get those.
Come on. Yeah. I love it. Well, I think today we're going to talk about transition seasons.
Yeah.
And if you're a leader for any amount of time, you're going to be in transition seasons.
It's true.
There's going to be times where things are a little turbulent. There are going to be times where people leave your company. If you're a leader, you're going to end up with a guy like Judas at some point on the journey. Betrayal will happen. Tensions run high. Money disappears. There's all kinds of seasons and situations that put us in a place where we don't feel like we're going to make it. And when I was thinking about a leadership topic to talk about today, I was just reminded of the story when Jesus is having a conversation with the disciples, and he says to them, let us go to the other side of the lake. Now, they've been doing a whole bunch of ministry. I think they've just fed 5,000 people, which most scholars believe was more like 20,000 people, because the text says 5,000 people. In addition, there were women and children. So a lot of people. Let's they were at 5. Scholars believe 20. We'll land at 12,500, right? You feed 12,500 people. And then Jesus says, go get in the boat. We got more stuff to do. You're ready. It's night time, right?
Yeah.
I'm ready to go to sleep. Ain't got time for all this. They get out into the lake, and as they're going to the other side, they encounter a storm. And when they get into the storm, every disciple starts freaking out. Everybody's panicking and worrying because the waves are really loud. The sound is chaotic. And they go down to the bottom of the boat, and Jesus is sleeping. Now, most of us have been where the disciples are, because sometimes when things get chaotic, we feel like our leader is not present. You ever had a boss like that?
Yeah.
Where you were like, man, it seems like the company could go down tomorrow and your boss is nowhere to be found. Or he was like out golfing.
Yeah.
Or, something like that. Or you got a team member that everybody else is freaking out and that team member just seems absent. And they say something that's interesting to Jesus. They say, do you even care? if we die? And Jesus wakes up and he speaks to the storm and he calms it immediately. And he asks him a question about faith. But it just reminds me that at the very beginning of this text, Jesus gave them a promise. He said, we are going to the other side of the lake. And when God gives a promise, he sees it to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a few things in that story, in that text, that I know we can learn from and glean from. One is we've got to stand on God's promises in transition seasons.
That's right.
So whatever God has called you to, he's faithful to see it to fruition. Now, God has no responsibility to cover that which he doesn't call. So if you just jumped out on a limb, you were taking a step of faith, but God never told you to do it, he has no responsibility to cover it.
Right.
However, he will rescue you if you start to drown.
Yeah.
That's the good news. But in that, we see that like God gave them a promise in the beginning. Jesus said, we're going to the other side of the lake. And the way I've taught it to our church for years is if God says we're going over, there's no way we're going under.
Right. Right.
So remember that. When you get into a transition season, when things get turbulent, when things get difficult, it's an opportunity for you to remember and stand and rely on the promises of God. There's been a lot of times in our leadership where I was in the position of the disciples and I felt like the ship was sinking. You know, when we navigated through COVID, our church transitioned from meeting fully in person to meeting completely online.
Right.
And we wanted to regather. It was time to regather as a church, but we couldn't because our facility didn't have circulating air.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got an airborne virus with no circulating air. So we couldn't regather.
Right.
And I remember going away to the mountains because I really felt like I was ready to quit. Listen, sometimes pastors don't talk about this kind of stuff. There's been plenty of times in ministry I've thought about quitting. This was one of the first times I was like really considering it because the fruit wasn't matching the frustration.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated all the time. I think you can have healthy frustration.
Yeah.
You can have holy discontent. But 9 times out of 10, when you're in that season, you've still got fruit. This was one of those seasons where I was frustrated but not fruitful. And so it just didn't feel like it was worth it at all. And I remember going away to the mountains, praying, going, Lord, like, are we ever going to regather? And I just felt led to go to Zephaniah 3:20. And that verse essentially says that God is going to bring us back home, that he's going to restore everything the enemy had taken. And for me, like it was a word. It was like a rhema word of God. It was one I was standing on, living on. And so I knew after God led me to that passage of text, our church is going to regather. We're going to make it to the other side. It doesn't matter what the in-between looks like. He said we were going to make it. So my frame of reference changed from that point forward because I was no longer wondering, are we going to go down? I was now standing on the promise that God said we would come back home.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that shift and that necessity is there for leaders to really lean into the Word of God and lean and glean from his promises, because we are sons and daughters of a living, active God that wants to speak to us. But we got to dig into his word. We got to learn those promises for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that you said stuck out to me, and I think, one of the biggest things that we can fall victim of at times is, we see transitions as storms. There's so much going on. There's chaos all around us, and it's really easy at times, I think, to take your eyes off of what the end goal is. And I mean, you think about Peter stepping out of the boat, and the fact that like he starts to sink. Well, the reason he starts to sink is because he took his eyes off Jesus. He paid attention to where he was versus where he was going.
Yeah.
And, so I love that because it really does. It's that constant reminder. We need to make sure that we're focused on the prize. We need to make sure we're focused on the end goal anytime we're going through a transition, like we're talking about here.
And I think what's interesting about that passage, you brought up Peter walking on water. The storm doesn't stop just because Peter took a step.
Right.
The text says that Peter became aware. The storm was already going on.
Yeah.
The storm was going on when Jesus called him.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget just how many storms we were navigating when God first called us.
Yeah.
Because we were so excited about the God who called us. Now we're at the place where we've been doing this for a little while and we've grown accustomed to all of this stuff that we've become desensitized to his presence and hyper aware of the storm we're facing. The storm was always there.
Yeah.
We were always going through problems. Now we've just let the storm become bigger than the God we serve, and that's not the case. I think storms are much like a tire pressure light for you and I.
Yeah.
We live in the South. It gets below 30 degrees at this stage, and every time we get into the cold, my tire pressure light goes off.
Yep.
And for a long time, I just ignored it because I was like, oh, it's just cold weather, right? But that was an identifier of a problem. And I became hyper aware of that problem when one day I had a flat tire.
Right.
The indicator was telling me something was wrong. I was just ignoring it.
Yeah.
And that's what storms do. Storms don't create the worst in us. They reveal the worst.
Right.
Because what's in you comes out of you when you go through conflict. And so for these disciples, this is a really powerful moment when they're in the middle of the water and they're going through this storm, because it's in this transition season transition moment from one side of the lake to the other that something in them is revealed. And what's revealed in them is that they struggle with trust. That there's an area of their life that they don't have control of and they haven't yet relinquished it over to God.
Yeah.
And we know this is a story about control because what's the first thing Jesus does? He stands up and he takes control over the situation to show that God is ultimately the one who's in control. That's what the text is all about. It's a control passage. And the beauty of it is when you navigate through storms and you go through a transition season, it helps you and I get ready for what God has for us next. Because as soon as they get to the other side of the lake, we're in Mark chapter 5, there's a demon-possessed man who doesn't have an encounter with a strong Savior and 12 guys who are running. He has an encounter with 13 men of God who are ready to fight the good fight and see him completely healed.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
So, transition seasons, we're going to have them. We're going to navigate through storms. But man, a lot of times the question is, how do we navigate through one of those transition seasons?
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question to you. So when we're in those transition seasons, there's got to be a process, some practicals for us to focus on and to think through, that kind of give us a guide to think through how we're going to navigate through that season overall. Do you want to walk us through that and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you like my transition process for a leader, because I think a lot of times most of the transition seasons we have involve other people. If you're a leader, chances are pretty high they involve somebody that you're leading. And so maybe you are a pastor of a church and you got a team member who isn't quite meeting the standard. What's the process look like to transition them? All those questions come up all the time. And maybe you're not a pastor, but you're a business owner, or you're even leading a volunteer team. What does the process look like when you start to go on a transition season? And I've got like a 4-step process. So step number 1 is realign. So these are going to be like 4 R's. So realign is step one, and realignment is really important because sometimes, much like a car, over a period of time, things get out of alignment, which causes there to be a natural drift. It wasn't intentional, it's not forceful or malicious, but because there's a lack of alignment, there's a drift in direction. And so realigning is the first part of this process because sometimes it's just as simple as cultural realignment.
Right.
Hey, this is not working in this area. Let's pull it back. Let's bring it back in. We're going to realign. If that doesn't work, and working is hard to gauge,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes as leaders, we talked about in an earlier episode, play the long game. You can't expect to have one conversation with somebody and then for things to be night and day different from that day forward.
Right.
And one of the things I've told our leaders a lot is you've got to be really careful as a leader after you address something because chances are high for the next 3 months, you're going to reap the harvest of their poor decisions like before you had that conversation.
Yeah.
And you're going to go, well, it's not working. No. They dropped the ball on that thing 3 months ago. It's just now catching up.
Right.
It doesn't change the conversation you had, but there are repercussions for, the mistakes people make. That's just is how it goes. So realign. Second thing we do is we redefine. Hey, if this role's not working and it's not about culture or alignment, we're going to redefine your role. So maybe the role you need to be in shifts with your gifts. Maybe the role is just a different, like maybe we need to figure out how you're wired a little bit better and leverage your strengths a little bit more. Redefine. Maybe there's certain things you were doing that you're no longer going to be doing, or maybe we've gone, you know what? You're not succeeding in this area, but you are killing it in this. So we're going to redefine your role to have you focus on XYZ. I might even redefine their point person for who they appoint to if it's not working, to just see sometimes, and this is just the reality of the game, some people can't thrive under your leadership.
Yeah.
And it's not a knock against you. You've got to be okay with the fact that if they can thrive better under a different leader, we want them to thrive.
Right. Exactly.
So we redefine. Third thing we do is we reassign. So this is not working out. It's not about culture. We've tried to shift your job description. That didn't work either. Reassigning is changing their seat on the bus.
Yeah.
So if you think about your organization, like a bus, every seat has people in it. Reassigning is moving them from one area to another. And for me, reassigning happens for two reasons. Reassigning either happens because their gift set meets the need of the ministry area or the department need that's there. So I've got a few people on our team who have had 6, 7, 8 different titles because they love our organization, but their gift set is to come in and fix things that are out of alignment, or there's a specific thing I need, and so I'll place them there for a season. That's one reason why people are reassigned. The other reason is it's my last ditch effort to keep them on the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes reassignment comes because I want them on the team. They've been with me. We're striving. We're growing. We're trying. But sometimes reassignment is my last attempt to keep them there. Because the reality is the roles that they've been in haven't been working. And so reassigning is, hey, I'm going to put you in this position. I think it's the best spot for you. But it more than likely has minimal people impact. Because if I need to remove them, which is the fourth step, we call it releasing, right? If that's the fourth step of the process, then that's the route we go. And so when I walk through this process with people, realign, redefine, reassign, release, no one should ever be surprised when they get fired, even in a volunteer role.
Yeah.
because you've walked them through the process. And all along the way, we're saying things like, hey, we're going to try something else.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to try something else.
Yeah.
My goal is to keep you on the team. We're going to try something else.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, I think that especially those middle two, redefine, reassign, like that can be a cyclical thing too, you know, where people grow out of, you know, a specific gifting or responsibility area that they may have had previously. You know, and I know this is especially true in the professional world too. It's like, you know, you get to a point where you're just like, you know what, I want to examine and look at different skill sets that, you know, may appeal to me more, or, you know, in the case of, you know, ministry, that God's calling me to a completely different area. I hadn't thought about it. I wasn't personally prepared for it previously, but God's calling me now to this new area. And so it gives us that ability to kind of redefine or reassign again in a kind of cyclical fashion, depending upon where people are in that season of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's what transition seasons look like. You're going to, for me, I've also stopped looking at transition seasons as a burden and realized, like, dude, they're part of the process. This is part of what being a leader looks like.
Yeah.
Is living in a consistent state of transition at all times. And how I respond to those seasons makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Because I think for leaders, your greatest influence gainer is in transition seasons. How people watch you navigate hardships, like as a pastor.
Yeah.
Okay. How people watch you handle people leaving the church matters. Makes all the difference. How people watch you, like, I'll give you an example. Years ago, there was a guy who transitioned off of our team. He left. He started talking bad about me and the church and all these other things. I didn't say anything. I didn't engage with it. I gained more leadership, credibility, influence, and respect in that season than probably any other season in our church.
Yeah.
How I led our church through COVID. Again, if you navigate transition seasons the right way, they're always for your benefit.
Yeah, man, that's so good. That's so good. And so, I mean, yeah, thank you for taking us through that. I think, you know, first and foremost, but, you know, we're getting to that point in today's episode where, you know, we want to take those leader submitted questions.
Come on.
And today's comes to us from Jason, and actually it fits right in line with this conversation today, which is, how do you know it's time to let someone go?
Yeah. Three things. So, how do you know it's time to let somebody go? I heard somebody once say, you know, it's time to let somebody go when their weaknesses have now become liabilities. So, every single person has weaknesses. And if you're a leader, I would encourage you to not bring a leader onto your team that you think you can fix. Because every leader will tell you that doesn't work. You know what? Oh, they've got this issue. Here's a red flag I saw in them, but I can fix that later. You never will. You won't get to, unfortunately. It's just not how it works. So, but if their weaknesses become liabilities, so like, for example, in the ministry world, I've had to be really careful. Like, one of my weaknesses is that I can seem like I don't care about people a lot. However, if there was ever a point where that weakness became a liability, where I actually was not caring for people, then there would be a problem.
Yeah.
Somebody would need to sit me down and have one of those realign, redefine conversations, you know. Weaknesses can become liabilities. Some people serve in ministry areas where their need is to be high organizational, but if their gift set doesn't meet that, then over a period of time, their weaknesses will become a liability, and it's time to transition. The second one would be if they're toxic for culture. Some people don't fit the culture you have or the one you're trying to create. And if they're not for it, they are absolutely against it. There's not a middle ground with culture building.
Right.
Because culture building takes years to build and days to destroy. Like it honestly, it only takes moments. You can build culture for a whole year, and one conversation can throw it all away.
It's true.
So if they're toxic for culture, it's time for them to go. And the third one, and it's my most frustrated one, because it's one that I struggle with the most. If you've been delaying it for a long time.
Yeah.
If you've been delaying it for a long time, it's time for them to go. Because 9 times out of 10, you are one leadership shift away from breakthrough in your organization. So that would be my 3. How do you know it's time for them to go? Weaknesses have become liabilities. They're toxic for culture. And if you've been delaying it, it's time to have the hard conversation. Rip the Band-Aid off. It's going to hurt for a second. But the good news is you're going to make it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I mean, and I think that's ultimately, that's the outcome that we take away from today is you're going to handle these transition moments. These transitions, they're part of ministry. They're part of the workplace. They're part of leadership.
Yeah.
And so you're going to make it. That's the key. So we love these leader submitted questions. Feel free to submit those in the comments of these YouTube videos. Also, feel free to send them into info@selahleaders.com. We want to get your questions. We want to be able to answer those and take ultimately those insights to other leaders as well. So with that, do you have any parting thoughts for us today?
I'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks so much for checking out the Selah Leaders podcast. Do me a favor and hit the like button. Be sure to comment, share, and subscribe. And if this message made a difference in your life, let us know. If you've got questions, if it made a difference, you can send us an email at info@selahleaders.com.